Something like I didn't need an introduction or anything, and I'm thinking, Henry Kissinger, this happened to him one time. He got up, and the guy says, "A man who needs no introduction." He gets up and he says, "Yes, but a little introduction would have been nice." I like the statistics from Oldham County, and I think we should have a proclamation today that Oldham County gets to count twice versus one time for Jefferson County. And that would be, or maybe we just count the votes in Oldham County. That would be nice. Probably about 100 years ago, there was a chaplain in the U.S. Senate. We still have chaplains. Believe it or not, we pray every day in the U.S. Senate. You're not allowed to pray anywhere here locally, probably in a government building, probably not here. But we pray every day in the U.S. Senate. And we had a chaplain. His name was Edwin Hale. He was a famous writer also. And they asked him, "Do you pray for the Senate?" He said, "Well, I've met the senators, and I pray for the people." And I've met the senators, and I think praying for the people is a good idea. I've also met enough of them now that I think there's no monopoly on knowledge up there. When I was first elected, John McCain called me and he said, "Yeah, the first 6 months you're up here, you'll pinch yourself and say, 'How did I get here amongst these important people, these personages you see on TV and all this?' He said, 'The next 6 months you'll pinch yourself and say, how the hell did the rest of these guys?'" There's some truth to that, and I think the truth to that is that I've been a believer in term limits. I think really there ought to be a rotation in office, that I have no monopoly on knowledge. I'm trying to do the best I can. I try hard because I have a job I can come back to and want to come back someday to practice medicine. I still do practice a little medicine. The rules prevent me from having a business, so I had to sell my business, sell my practice, everything. But I still am able to do some charitable surgery, and I've done that around the country, around the state mostly. When I was running for office, it's not all, it's cracked up to be. There is exciting things in debate and being on television things. But one day I was coming through Litchfield, and this woman came up to me, and she grabbed me by the hair. And she said, "Oh, I just wanted to see if it was a toupee or not." And I said, "Hey, lady, I'm just having a bad hair day. Can't you give me a break?" So I thought I'd gotten past that. And so last week I'm in Israel, not at taxpayer expense. It was a privately funded trip. But I'm in Israel, and I'm praying at the West Wall. And out of tradition, I was wearing a yarmulke. And so I don't always read the comments on the internet, but I just happened to look at the story and read the first comment. And the first comment was, "Yeah, look at that guy with that yarmulke stuck to his rug." So I wanted to go ahead and get that out of the way. You may not agree with me on everything. You may not think I'm always genuine, but the hair is genuine. We had a big fight recently. You may have heard about it, the fiscal cliff. So if it's called a cliff, I guess we can assume it's a bad thing, right? We didn't want to go over a cliff. But nobody ever really talked specifically about what the cliff was. What is the cliff? What was so bad about the cliff that we wanted to avoid? It was taxes going up. So this is sort of a remarkable thing. Republicans, Democrats, everybody thought that if all of your taxes went up, it would be a bad thing. This is a remarkable thing, because when the tax rates were reduced under Bush, every Democrat voted against that. So now we have a cliff approaching, and people are saying, this is a couple weeks ago, people were saying, this cliff is coming, you must save some of the folks from drowning. And we're going to offer you, the president, the Democrats are going to offer you a chance to save 98% of the people. And I said, well, that's good, but should we really endorse drowning as a policy? So we're saying it's not good for 98% of the people, but it's good for 2% of the people? It never really made any sense to me. Because my question is that if the money is sent or taken from Oldham County, whomever it is taken from, and sent to Washington, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Now, Milton Friedman said, and I think this is the best way to look at government, Milton Friedman said that nobody spends someone else's money as wisely as you spend your own. It's the argument for minimizing government, even local government. It's the argument for private enterprise, because private enterprise distributes goods well because it's your money. You have to distribute goods. You have to make a profit. You're driven by this necessity of efficiency. Government doesn't have that at all levels. It's better at local government. It's a little bit less good at the state government. And then it's really bad at the federal government. I tell people, don't send any more money to Washington. There's no objective evidence that we're very good with money. We're borrowing $50,000 a second. We're borrowing $4 billion a day. There's no evidence that we're frugal with your money. And you say, well, we just need to squeeze more money. We need to raise taxes on the rich. My question is, what are you spending the money on up there? What's it going for? Last year we spent $3 million to study monkeys on methamphetamine. Does anybody want to know what monkeys do on methamphetamine? They act kind of crazy like humans do on methamphetamine. Do we really need to spend $3 million on that? We spent $300,000 on our robotic squirrel because we wanted to know, would a rattlesnake strike a robotic squirrel if it wasn't wagging its tail? And they asked for volunteers from real squirrels, but no real squirrel would agree not to wag its tail. So they built a robotic squirrel, and guess what? The rattlesnake will strike a robotic squirrel that's not wagging its tail. $325,000. We spent $500,000 on developing a menu for Mars. So when we colonize Mars, we need to be prepared. And this is a good job for your kids. If any of you have kids that don't have a job and they've got out of school and they don't have a job yet, $5,000 stipend. They did the study in Hawaii, not too bad, and you had to like food. So the requirements are pretty stringent. You have to like food. You get to Hawaii, so they study what will we have on Mars, and lo and behold, a bunch of college kids decided it'd be good to have pizza on the menu. So you spend $500,000 to learn that. You can multiply that by the thousands. And people say, oh, well, you're just talking about $3 million. You could never balance the budget if you cut that. Multiply every example I said by the thousands, by the hundreds of thousands. Your representatives in the abstract are for balancing the budget. Every Republican in the Senate is for a balanced budget amendment. And yet, half the Republicans we lose to various little special interests from their state. There's a sugar subsidy. There's about probably 10 people who are big sugar farmers in the country. I mean, it's a limited amount of very wealthy families. We subsidize it by 19 cents per pound or something. We wanted to cut 1 penny per pound. It would have saved $9 million. The first argument is, oh, that's nothing, why bother? We couldn't save $9 million because the sugar industry was so strong that it convinced several Republicans to vote the other way. And if you wanted to balance the budget, cutting $9 million at a time, you'd have to cut it 140,000 $9 million cuts to balance the budget. Now, that's not an argument against starting. You've got to start. You've got to look everywhere for cuts. But it is a spending problem. When President Obama came into office, we spent 20% of our GDP. So $1 in $5 from the economy went to your federal government. It's now 1 in 4. It's nearly 25% of GDP. Government has expanded. We have many more employees. You know, if your real estate's not doing well around here, you should have bought in Washington. It's the only place in the country where real estate values never dipped and have soared through the roof because we keep adding and adding more employees. But once again, it gets back to where would you rather have your money? And really gets back to your general attitude about what you want from government. The president says he just wants more, he wants to squeeze more money out of the rich. The rich are not paying their fair share. Middle class are saddled with the burden. It's not true. The top 1% pay 40% of the income tax. The top 1% pay 40% of the income tax. The top 10%, which is about $200,000 and up, they pay 70% of the income tax. The top 50%, $75,000 and up, pay 96% of the income tax. We have a very progressive income tax. And really the question is how do you get the economy to grow? Do you squeeze more money out of the successful, or do you try to get them to hire more people? So instead of having a government that comes to you and saying, you made a lot of money, I'm going to squeeze more money out of you so government can have more money, we should be saying, you employ 50 people. What can I do to encourage you to employ 55 people? But we have the wrong attitude about government. It's about punishing those who are successful or squeezing more out instead of saying, how do we get the economy to grow? We're growing at about 1.5 to 1.8%. It's an anemic growth rate. We're adding about 155,000 jobs a day, which is about a month, which is about what you need to break even. We're actually enrolling more people as disabled than we're employing, which might have something to do with the definition of what disability is. There's a picture floating around the internet. You may have seen this, and it says, what's wrong with this picture? And it's a picture of the Social Security office. And you look at the picture and you say, what's wrong with that picture? There's no senior citizens in the office. Everybody in there is under 50 years old or under 55. They're all disabled, and they look like me. The problem is when you have people who look like me who hop out of their truck, they need to be working, and they shouldn't be listed as disabled. We've gotten too soft. We've gotten to this point where, and I'm not saying we can't help those who can't help themselves. If somebody's missing 2 legs and they're on dialysis and they have $4,000 in medical bills every month, I think we can help them, and we should. But the thing is young, healthy, relatively young, healthy people who are able-bodied ought to be working. If we give people assistance, it ought to be temporary, and it ought to have a work requirement with it. And the work shouldn't be easy because there should be an incentive to go look for a job in the air conditioning. But we should do those things. We need to have tough love. We don't have an unlimited amount of money. We're borrowing $50,000 a second. So we get through the fiscal cliff and we save 99% of the people from drowning. It is good. Those rates are now permanent. 1% will go up. But is that a good thing? When you raise tax rates, sometimes you get less revenue. We won't know this for a year or two whether it works. But sometimes when you lower rates, you get more revenue. In the 1920s, we brought the rates from 75% down to the high 20s, and you had a huge boom in the 1920s. During the 1930s, we raised taxes 6 years in a row, and the Depression got worse. In the 1960s, under Kennedy, we lowered tax rates significantly. Unemployment was cut in half. We had another boom. In Reagan, we lowered the rates from 70 to 50. Then we lowered them from 50 to 28. This is the top rate. Guess what? We got more revenue. The rich paid a higher percentage of that revenue. So the rich paying their fair share doesn't work. If you raise taxes, you actually need to do the opposite. You need to lower rates. 2 years ago in England, they raised the rates, punitive taxes on millionaires. Guess what? They got less millionaires and they got less revenue. It doesn't work. What you really need is economic growth. We had 1 year under Reagan when the economy grew like between 6 and 7%. Then you were able to add millions of jobs, millions of real jobs. You don't add real jobs through a government stimulus, through the government program. That's an illusion because the money comes from somewhere. They got to take it from you, or they've got to print it or borrow it in order to create these government jobs. The problem with a government job is the people who contribute to politicians influence where the money goes and the jobs. So the solar panel industry, they are huge Democrat contributors. George Kaiser, 20th richest man in the world, owned a company named Solyndra. He gets a $500 million loan, which is flushed down the toilet. Why would we be giving a billionaire a $500 million government guaranteed loan? Guaranteed by you, and it goes down the toilet. The Kennedy family has a company called BrightSource. Gross, and I'm not a big finance guy, but their gross revenue is $13 million, and they got a $1.8 billion taxpayer loan. Sounds like a pretty good deal, right? $1.8 billion loan. It's a company that's inevitably going to fail, hasn't yet. There have been 5 or 6 other solar panels. There's $30 billion wrapped up in solar panels. So one of the things I proposed, and I've had an amendment, I haven't been able to force a vote on it yet, is let's end the Department of Energy loans and put that money into the highway fund. Maybe you could get your exchange if we weren't wasting it on crony capitalism given to solar panels which are not economic and have gone bankrupt. I've also proposed the same thing with foreign aid. The president said we need to do some nation building at home. I agree with him, but he needs to follow through with that. And that means that countries that are burning our flag, chanting death to America, maybe they don't need any more of our money. Pakistan continues to hold in prison the doctor that helped us get bin Laden. Dr. Shakil Afridi gave information, worked on a vaccine program that helped to get bin Laden, gave us information. He's now in jail for the rest of his life, and we still give Pakistan billions of dollars. Egypt, we're giving F-16s, Abrams tanks. I'm concerned those tanks and planes may someday be used against Israel. So I have concerns about what we're doing with this money. There is a limited amount of money, and there are things that we can agree, Republican and Democrat, that we want. Roads and bridges. You know, the road fund, I was talking to Senator Harris for the states, about $420 million. The bridge project in Louisville needs $2 billion. The one up in northern Kentucky needs $2 billion. How are you ever getting to $2 billion when you have $420 million? You got to find some other source. So one of the things I proposed to the president when I rode on the plane with him was there's a 10% set aside for beautification for bike paths. I ride bikes. I like bike paths. If you've got a surplus, build more of them. But if you've got a deficit and you don't have enough money to repair your roads, or change is more important this year than a bridge, more important than a bike path, you got to give your officials the ability to make that decision. So I propose we get rid of the 10% set aside. You could still do it. If Oldham County decided you want bike paths, you build them. But you could also decide we want the exchange for the next 2 or 3 years, and we're going to put all of our enhancement money towards an exchange near your industrial park. Those decisions should be something you have the freedom to do. And we fought that, and the president kind of nodded his head and seemed reasonable and then opposed to the idea. I think we are progressing more towards that, though. I think the next transportation bill or this one may actually give you more freedom with that. We have to look for innovative ways to find money. But I think money shouldn't just be borrowed or printed. We owe the Chinese $1 trillion. We owe Japan $1 trillion. We owe the Russians a couple $100 billion. We even owe Mexico money. We can't just continue to do this. So what I would say is when people come up with something and they say, we want our government to do this, let's take it from someplace where it's being wasted. So for example, Sandy. We've had FEMA disasters in Kentucky, so it's hard for us to say we're not going to send money to other parts of the country through disaster. But there really is no money, and there's not enough money to pay for it. These politicians from up there just beat on their chest and say, give us our money, we want it all. They're only projected to spend $9 billion next year, but they want $60 billion, which they're projected maybe to spend over 4 years, which includes money for an Alaskan fishery. It includes money for 5 southern states where they're buying the Republican votes by giving them some kind of stuff for previous disasters years ago. It also includes $700,000 in there for a performance art festival. And this is New York City, of course. Got to have a performance arts festival. They do some pretty cool things there. You need to know because your money's going to go to this. Knot tying, Occupy Wall Street photo exhibit, flash mobs. Anybody know what a flash mob? Flash mob performance. And the flash mob performance is, this is really interesting. Great use of your money. Everybody shows up with their iPod at the same time and pushes play, and I guess they dance, stand still. I don't know what they do, but you're going to be paying for it. Performance art festival called River to River Festival, $700,000 in there. Alaskan fisheries, all done sort of to buy votes of other senators. That never happens in state senate, does it? But the thing is so I introduced an amendment. I didn't get very many votes. I said, look, they're only going to spend $9 billion next year. Nobody in government seems to be very good with money. Let's give them only the $9 billion. Come back a year from now and give us a report on how well you're doing with spending the money and what you need for the next year. And I said, let's take the $9 billion from countries that are burning our flag and chanting death to America and not send it there, and let's send it to New England. And I got, like, I don't know, 10 votes or something. Because so many up there just want to keep doing the same thing we've always done. Just keep sending the money overseas. They think we buy friends. Sometimes it backfires on us. We sent Mubarak $60 billion over years, the head of Egypt. But he essentially was a dictator. I mean, they lived under martial law and an order where they couldn't congregate. So when they did congregate, you had that Arab Spring going, they had 100,000 people in Tahrir Square. You know what they did? They sprayed them with tear gas. You know where the tear gas was made? In Pennsylvania. How did they buy the tear gas? With your money. We give them foreign aid, they buy tear gas, they suppress their people. Do you think their people think that foreign aid's a good thing or a bad thing? So we think we're buying friends, but we're buying friends that are sometimes unpopular leaders in country. The population rebels against them, and so they don't see the foreign aid necessarily as a good thing. Plus, we just don't have it to send. We have to borrow it from China to send it to Pakistan. We're borrowing $1 trillion every year. We have to start thinking of other solutions, other places to find the money, other things to do. We will have a battle in the next month over the debt ceiling. Now, is it a good idea to default? No, I think it's a bad idea to default. The only way we can have any leverage with a debt ceiling, though, is to take default off the table. We could take it off the table, though. The reason it's on the table is because the president and the Democrats always use this to say, oh, we'll default. Why would we ever have to default? Even if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we bring in over $200 billion a month in revenue. The interest payment is $30 billion. We have plenty of tax revenue every month. Not to pay for all of government, but to pay for the interest, we've got plenty. We've got enough to pay for Social Security, soldiers' salaries. We have enough to pay for 70% of government. Some of it would take a 30% cut. Some of it, like monkeys on meth, might take 100% cut. So there are things you just have to cut out, but you'd be forced to make the decision. What would it mean not to raise the debt ceiling if we ever did it, which I don't think we have the courage to do it, Republican or Democrat. If we had the courage to not raise the debt ceiling, you'd immediately have a balanced budget. Would it be disruptive? Yes. In the period of time when it's disruptive, over a month or two, the president might at that point be convinced to come and say, this is what we do to balance it gradually. So as much as I really want things done, I'm actually a believer in gradualism. My budget would balance in 5 years. but mine is the most dramatic budget ever presented in the last couple of decades up there, and it balances over 5 years. Paul Ryan's balanced over 28 years, and he was vilified by the Democrats as being this extreme right-wing, way out there budget, and it didn't balance for 28 years. Has to me balance over a finite period of time, because there'll be different people. I may not be alive in 28 years. How can I promise you that we'll stay on this glide path and that we'll balance in 28 years if I'm not in office or alive? So I think you have to do it over a shorter period of time when you can trust the people you've actually elected to actually do it. But in order to go through the deadline of the debt ceiling, we would have to pass legislation directing the president that he has to pay interest on the debt. We'd let all the marketplace know we will not default. We could do that by majority vote. We could do that in the House because we can win the House. And I think we should, as Republicans, do that, bring it to the Senate and try to vote on it. And guarantee that we do the typical functions of government, Social Security, soldiers, salaries, things like that. Then we would have the leverage to try to get the president to do the right thing. I ultimately think the right thing is a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. They don't adhere to anything else. A year and a half ago when we had the debt ceiling fight and there was all that rancor and all that debate and you thought, well, maybe we finally did something good, most of the things we scuttled. We had caps on how much you could spend. We routinely exceed those. We had a sequester, which was supposed to be $1 trillion cut, including military and domestic. We've now pushed that off 2 months, and it hasn't happened. And realize what these numbers are a little bit confusing. They're all 10-year numbers, and the congressional budget baseline goes up $9 trillion over 10 years. That's the baseline. The baseline isn't zero. It's a baseline that increases $9 trillion over 10 years. So when they tell you the sequester that Republicans and Democrats are so worried about that would be so draconian, it cuts $1 trillion off the $9 trillion. So we'd still go up $8 trillion over 10 years, and that's a cut. There are no real cuts. If I were to get my way, I would freeze spending because I think it's simple. People can understand it, and they will know there'll be less money because inflation will make the money. There won't be as much money there. I would freeze spending. But the Congressional Budget Office would scare you to death, and they would say, freezing spending is a $9 trillion cut over 10 years. So the sequester was $1 trillion. Bowles-Simpson Commission, what everybody talked about was more dramatic, was $4 trillion. Still means the baseline's going up $5 trillion, and then a freeze is $9 trillion. So you can see how people confuse the situation by the way it's presented. We have to do something, though. There will be a day of reckoning, and there is a possibility of destroying our currency. I truly think that's what motivated me to run for office, because I'm worried what happens if we go on this course. In the 1920s, Germany did destroy their currency. The currency was wheeled around in wheelbarrows. It was burned for fuel. The workers demanded to be paid twice a day because the value of the currency was lost so quickly. I gave my dad some framed currency from that. Like September 1st, it took like 100 marks to buy a loaf of bread. September 14th, 10,000 marks. September 30th, 100,000 marks. And then 2 weeks later, it was like 63 million marks or something to buy a loaf of bread, and then it was done. But out of that chaos, they elected Hitler. Hitler vilified a certain group and said it was all the Jews' fault. So you have to realize that chaos is not what you want. Who knows what comes out of chaos, but we do not want chaos. All these things can be fixed gradually. You have to fix entitlements. Entitlements is 2/3 of your budget. Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. They're not paid for. Social Security pays out more than comes in taxes. It's not my fault. It's not Democrats' fault. It's your great-grandparents' fault for having too many damn kids. And then it's your fault for not having enough kids. And then my fault for not having enough kids. We have a real big generation retiring, and then smaller generation, and then smaller generation again paying taxes, and we're living longer. These are just demographic facts, and we shouldn't ignore them. We're going to have to work longer. My generation will have to work longer. It's the only way you fix it. You need to raise the age of eligibility for Social Security gradually. You do it like 2 or 3 months a year over about 20 years, and that fixes most of the Social Security problem. You need to do it for Medicare also. But it's not a real popular issue to go around telling people you're going to have to work longer and wait longer to get your money. I think also we have to means test. Means test means people like myself who have been successful will get a little bit less. You still get Social Security, but you get $200 or $300 less a month. And I think most of us, probably a lot of people in this room, could live with that if it saved the system for those who live only on the check. That way we're not cutting the check from the people who that's all they live on when they retire. These things have to be addressed, but both sides are sort of afraid to do it because they're afraid you won't vote for us if we tell you we have to cut something or if we have to change something. But it is coming one way or another. If we wait, stick our head in the sand, it'll come dramatically and it'll be a real problem. If we do it gradually, it's not as hard to do, and you do it on the younger people. And I've got 10 years, 15 years to figure out what I'm going to do with retirement. And so I think that's the way to look at it. In order to, I think, regain our greatness as a country, we need to recognize what made us great. And what made us great is our system. We need to be proud of profit. We need to be proud of self-interest. Greed is if it's the judge's money. If it's my money, it's just self-interest. It's just name calling. Self-interest is not necessarily a bad thing. Self-interest drives us to be efficient. It doesn't mean greed. Self-interest means that we've created great wealth and we've given great wealth away. Who's the richest country in the world? We are. Who's the most generous country in the world? We are. When Haiti needs money, who gives? We do. When babies need adopted, who adopts them? We do. We have a great, rich, and humanitarian country, but it comes from capitalism. It comes from our system. So we need to be proud of that system and not be a system that just thinks, let's just tax all the successful people, take that money and send it to Washington, and everything will be better. We want more successful people. We want more rich people. That's what we should be in favor of, is more rich people, not less rich people. If we recognize where we came from and what we stand for, I think we can be a great country again. We are in the tipping balance, and I think we really need to address this soon, or this great country is really in danger of heading in the wrong direction. I thank you very much for allowing me to serve, and thank you for inviting me today. Thank you.